Welcome back, everyone, to the Mindfulness in Education Summit. Today, we're talking with 3 educators, and we'll be getting into how mindfulness actually shows up and looks in the classroom, a little bit of the journey that each person took to get to bringing mindfulness to their classroom, and some strategies that hopefully you can take with you as you go off into your day. My name is Megan Sweet. I'm the Director of Training at Mindful Schools, and Mindful Schools is a nonprofit organization that brings mindfulness to educators. Our focus is to empower educators to create healthy and thriving schools, and we believe that begins with supporting educators to develop a mindfulness practice within themselves. So learning how to give themselves that oxygen mask and provide some support for themselves to connect back in. And once they have that deepened connection with themselves through the practice of mindfulness, we then provide strategies on how to bring mindfulness to their context, to their schools, their classrooms, other interactions they have with adults and children alike. And we have quite a few courses. One's just on the fundamentals of mindfulness. We also then support educators again to bring them to the classroom. We have a course on mindful communication, on ways to deal with difficult emotions, and then also on a year-long program around bringing mindfulness, supporting those folks that are really into it, to bringing mindfulness to their context on a deeper level. I am so honored today to be with 3 excellent panelists, all of whom are students from Mindful Schools. And so I'll take a moment to have each person introduce themselves. And I'll just ask you to introduce yourself, your name, what job you're doing now. So if you're in a school or working for Mindful Schools, what your position is, a little bit of your background, and what mindfulness trainings you've done with us at Mindful Schools, so folks can get some grounding and all of that. So I'll begin with Judah. So hi, Judah.
Hi, how you doing? Greetings, everyone, and everyone out there on the web. My name is Cornell Kerlock, also known as Lord Judah. That's my artist name. I've been an artist for all of my life. I became a teaching artist about 15 years ago, and that placed me in classrooms working with teachers. So I've been partnering in classrooms with teachers for about over 15 years as a teaching artist support. My Mindful Schools experience started about in 2016. And I've done difficult emotions, mindful educators essentials, mindful fundamentals, mindful communication, and also the year long. So those are the courses that I've done with Mindful Schools.
Thank you, Judah. We'll go next to Corey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Corey O'Rourke. I am the head of program here at Mindful Schools. And I came to Mindful Schools as a high school teacher. So I was a high school teacher looking for some mindfulness programming actually for myself. I was feeling a bit overwhelmed and looking for some support for myself as a teacher, and very quickly understood that this was something that I needed to give and share with my students. And so I went through some of the same courses that Judah shared having taken. So I took Mindfulness Fundamentals, Mindful Educator Essentials, and then became a certified mindfulness instructor in our year-long program. And then from there, created a mindfulness program at my school site, and then a little bit more, and then joined the Mindful Schools team here in the office. That's me.
Welcome, Corey. And finally, we have Alan.
Hi there. My name is Alan Brown. I am currently a lead teacher of our Mindful Teacher Certification program at Mindful Schools, and that's actually how I came in the door to Mindful Schools originally as a participant of our first year of that program. I was a high school administrator at the time, and I still am working in a school, but I was a high school administrator that had come in looking for tools to teach students. I was actually kind of bypassing myself, and in my first year as a school administrator, I'd been tasked with changing some school culture as a dean of student life, asked to, can we make this less of a pressure cooker? Can we teach kids to, have some calm or balance or resilience? And I thought, okay, what do I need to have in order to do that? And what I very quickly learned or realized was that I was staying at school until 8 o'clock at night. I was waking up at 4 in the morning to check emails. That I somehow had been tasked with the well-being of others and was completely ignoring my own. And having a mindfulness practice or developing a mindfulness practice for myself, I quickly learned was really the best thing I could offer to anyone else. And I certainly couldn't teach what I wasn't practicing. So I now have the great pleasure of working with so many teachers in my own consulting work and with Mindful Schools to offer that practice, and then help build upon that into and turn it into teaching and offering the practices to kids as well.
Thanks, Alan. So yeah, I think Alan touched on it. Each one of you touched on it in different ways. Often we find at Mindful Schools that educators are coming in with a desire to bring mindfulness to their students, right? So they're seeing their students in some kind of need. They've heard that mindfulness can be supportive. And it's often the entry that we get. We have educators saying, okay, what can I bring to my students? But I'm wondering from each one of you, why do educators need mindfulness? So why is it an important, why is it augmented or how has it augmented your own life and your own experiences that Alan and Corey started to touch on, but also why do you think educators themselves need to have this practice in their lives? And I'll start with Corey.
Thank you, Megan. That's a great question. So I think it's very natural for our teachers to put our students first, right? We come into the classroom to serve students, and it's very natural for us to consider what our students' needs are. And I think because of that, we're seeing burnout, we're seeing exhaustion, we're seeing teachers fleeing education, we're seeing and I work in the teacher prep programs here at a university in San Francisco. We're seeing a reducing number of young people going into the teaching profession. They're really understanding what a massive job it is to become a teacher and to hold that profession. And so I think both from a sustainability point of view and from a wholehearted point of view, we really need to start to look at what it is to support teachers. So when I think about a teacher standing in the front of the classroom, I want to think about how we can support and resource that teacher. And I think that's a new way of thinking about the profession. So I want to say it's very natural for us as teachers to think about what can I do for my kids. And it's a little bit tricky, it's a little bit uncomfortable maybe to think about what can I do for myself. But we have to start thinking about what can we do for teachers if we're going to keep the teachers, the best and the brightest and the most experienced teachers in the classroom. And a little bit, what's helpful for me as a teacher is to think about what I do for myself is what I do for my students. I always hear this Brene Brown quote of you can't give what you don't have, right? So as we resource our teachers, we do resource our students. As we keep our most experienced teachers in the classroom, we do serve our students best. And at Mindful Schools, we really lean on this idea of the teacher's nervous system is the intervention in the room. And so when we resource our teacher, when we create a teacher who is not only teaching mindfulness, but teaching mindfully, we are helping to support the students who are in the room. I'll take a pause there. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. So Judah, why do you think teachers need to practice mindfulness?
Well, for me, what Mindful Schools provided me with was an opportunity to practice my own emotional inventory. So, as a teaching artist, I'm always, in different schools throughout the course of a year, different populations, prison population, mental health population, and that work over time, over the course of a year, it could become, debilitating. And so if I don't do my own practice, if I don't have a resource to really have a check-in on my emotional state, then when I get triggered, in the classroom or wherever I'm working, what happens is over time it'll wear and tear on me. So the skills and tools that I've gained from Mindful Schools have given me the opportunity to just have that moment for myself to do my emotional inventory and understand how I may be reacting as a result of some, of things that are going on in my life. So that I can be more present for my students or my participants in my groups. So those are the tools that I've gained and that have worked for me. So the space, the one key word that I could say is space, the space that it creates for you emotionally. is the reason why mindfulness should be in the classroom, and most importantly in a teacher's life.
Thank you, Judah. Yeah, that famous Viktor Frankl quote that's actually a summarized summary of a quote from Stephen Covey, that the space between stimulus and response is a version of it as our place of freedom. So I'm hearing from you that mindfulness gives you both some awareness around the space that around your own inventory. I love that framing of emotional inventory, but also then the space to make a choice once you become aware. So thank you for that. Alan, why do you feel like educators need mindfulness?
This may be a little bit of a riff on what Corey and Judah shared. I'm super interested in the growing research around this. What happens in a classroom when a teacher is resourced with a mindfulness practice? Tish Jennings and some other studies that what happens to classroom management, what happens to the sense of time urgency, what happens to the relationships in the room is palpable. And I think for myself, of the times as a young teacher when maybe my classroom management wasn't at its best, and 9 times out of 10, that is because I was triggered, not because of something students did. I mean, it's their job, right? Students don't always pay attention, students don't always behave. That's actually completely normal human behavior. And if we have the capacity to hold that, I can kind of remember the first time as a teacher when, with my mindfulness practice, I became aware, oh, I'm noticing tightness in my chest. Oh, I'm noticing that I want to yell. Oh, I'm noticing that I'm about to say something unskillful. And, because students were doing a project that actually wasn't really well put together, and that wasn't their fault. And the fact that they weren't behaving in the way that I wanted them to, that was about my wanting to control the situation and having a different resource and not taking that out on them, but rather taking a time in. And then eventually learning the space to even narrate and model for them. Oh, I'm noticing this right now. I need a moment so that I don't this. And that kind of language is something that I really didn't have before. And I noticed it again and again and again with teachers. This comes up of how they show up with students really changes.
Thanks for that, all of you. Yeah, I think I would add maybe the one thing that each one of you didn't share yet that I think is also really important is that mindfulness isn't something that we can teach to others without having embodied practice ourselves. That's something that you named, Alan, in your modeling. And I think this is a really powerful point I think sometimes educators are good at taking information and giving it to others and translating it. But mindfulness is absolutely one of those practices that you need to be able to integrate it yourself and experience it so you understand the nuances of how to teach it to others in a way that's going to be supportive and impactful for them. And so, yeah, those are really beautiful examples of just that ability I heard from all of you, ability to cope with our own emotions, be aware of them in the first place, to have a more facility in the moment to make different choices about how we show up for ourselves and show up for our students, and can be much more intentional and therefore create those safer and more supportive learning environments for our students through taking care of ourselves first, which can feel like a challenge. So that'd be good to talk with each one of you a bit about how mindfulness actually shows up in a classroom, or what does it look like in practice. So we can talk about it, but it'd be supportive, I think, especially for listeners who maybe aren't in the classroom anymore or in a school setting. What are some ways that you've seen or supported mindfulness to show up with others? And I'll start with Alan first.
Well, I feel really lucky in what I do to get to watch a lot of other teachers teach. And there is nothing sweeter than watching a teacher at any level offer mindfulness to their students. And it looks really different in every classroom, which is the other neat part of watching so many different teachers teach. From an early elementary classroom where it may just be that circle time starts with some mindful listening and a mindfulness bell, or that there are some really fun breaths, like a bunny breath, and as we let our ears come up and then sync, or the Spider-Man breath, and lots of other fun little ways of playing mindfulness, or all the way up to a 12th grade classroom where maybe it's an AP class and it's just kind of a brain break where students are learning to actually focus or regulate themselves before a test. Maybe even in one of those classes that isn't explicitly a mindfulness class, students are learning over time. These are the ways that we can take these time ins or brain breaks, or all the ways that we've kind of come to talk about having space to become learning ready. But yeah, there are many different ways of doing it and inserting it, or the explicit mindfulness curriculum, or social and emotional time, health class. It really comes in so many different forms. It's so neat. But the neatest part is that it fits in all of them, that it never doesn't make sense, because who is showing up as a learner and how you show up as a learner is an incredible way to resource children. And we ask them all day to pay attention, or sit down, or be in control, or do this or do that. But when we bring it into any classroom, we're actually giving them choice and empowerment, rather than kind of creating a class that's about control.
Thanks, Alan. Judah, can you tell us a little bit about how you see it rolling out in a classroom or school?
Well, I thank you for the question. I feel that what it opens up, what it gives students an opportunity to do is practice their listening. And that means listening to themselves first. And what it does is open up them to have the ability to listen to themselves and others. So just that time and space that we create in that moment, usually as an outside provider, what I come in and do is, I offer the mindfulness. So, that the chance that I give them is a chance to take a mindful minute for themselves, for the purpose of clearing what may have happened the class before, or what may have happened early in the day. So just utilizing an opportunity to have space for myself to listen to what's going on in my body, and to listen to what's going on in my mind, gives me the opportunity to have space to do that for others. So, and as far as in the classroom, what I feel it does, it just gives those students, that moment and space to just have some clarity, and to definitely ground themselves better in their presence for themselves and their fellow classmates, and ultimately the teacher.
Thanks for that, Judah. So, Corey, can you give us some examples of, I know you taught mindfulness as a teacher with your students, so you could start there, but also you spent a lot of time supporting others to bring mindfulness to their educational context. We have we have a set of schools that we provide support to bringing mindfulness to a larger context. So if you could talk about either one of those things, but what are some examples of how it shows up?
I feel really grateful to get to follow after Alan and Judah. They did a beautiful job of kind of naming different aspects of how mindfulness shows up in the classroom. So I would say that definitely there are kind of two elements of mindfulness showing up at school. And one is the way that we do mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is a thing that we do, and then mindfulness is the way that we are. So there's an element of doing mindfulness and then a way of being mindful. And so for me, I taught at the high school level, secondary level. And so Judah did a beautiful job of naming, mindfulness could be a mindful minute starting at the beginning of a class. So for my high schoolers, they're going from class to class to class, and starting each class with a mindful minute to allow students to transition from a class to a class, allowing them to arrive is a great practice. I always told other schools or other students, other teachers, that when I practiced mindful minutes with each of my 5 classes, I, as a teacher, got to practice mindfulness 5 times on a Monday. Mindfulness practiced, this is the doing, right? The doing umbrella. Mindfulness practiced at transitions within a class. If you're sending kids out into group work or bringing them back in as a whole class at a transition point is great. Practicing mindfulness before an exam is great. Practicing mindfulness in those moments where there seems to be emotional overwhelm in the classroom is great. There are lots of places you can do mindfulness or practice mindfulness in the classroom that is helpful. And then also I want to name that doing mindfulness or practicing explicit mindfulness practice, seated practice, isn't the only way. It isn't the place that we stop. We don't just stop mindfulness with the doing. There is also this other piece, and that is the being. So not only at Mindful Schools, we're not just interested in teaching how to teach mindfulness, we're also interested in talking about and practicing how to teach mindfully, which is more about the being mindfulness in community with each other. And I think that's more around how are we noticing in ourselves? How are we, this kind of embodied practice of mindfulness? How am I as the educator noticing what's happening inside of myself? How am I setting up relationships with students where I get the chance to put the doing aside and I get to focus more on the being with my students? How am I creating situations and containers in my classroom for my students to worry less about the doing and getting a chance to be with each other? But I also, Megan, I heard your question about how we are supporting our schools. So the schools in the program here that we're supporting that are working on transitioning to mindful schools. And I think that that's a part of the work there too, is to help the schools understand mindfulness definitely is a doing. We are definitely supporting explicit mindfulness training for our teachers, for themselves, and training for our teachers, for their students. And also we are having conversations around and support and training for this embodied practice of teaching mindfully in addition to teaching mindfulness.
Thanks for that, Corey. And in a moment, I'll give you each a chance to reflect once more on that question. But I think I just want to name some themes that I heard right now already, which is mindfulness is a great application during transition points. So to bring students in, and it's great for adults too. So I just want to name like any of these suggestions that we're talking about for students are also really great for teachers. So what would it look like for a teacher to take a mindful minute in between class transitions before when one class leaves, the next one enters, or at lunchtime, taking 10 minutes to sit and just reconnect with themselves and kind of check in with how they're doing during the course of the day. It can be on the move, like taking 3 breaths while walking from, one part of the school to the other, because time moves fast at schools. I also heard applications that would be supportive for students around like test taking or if a conflict arises. So these moments where we're just reminding and supporting students to connect back in with themselves, to use it as a nurturing tool to help them to kind of, again, just recalibrate so that they're not just in their emotions or in a reaction state, but they can get into that choice point that Judah was talking about. So does anybody want to add anything more around how mindfulness shows up in classrooms? And Alan, you had something you want to share.
Yeah, as I hear some of the other pieces that are shared, it occurs to me that one thing that's important to name is we often talk when we use mindfulness in kind of the small bites, transitions, beginning of class, it can be easy to get the impression that mindfulness is about regulation, that this is the thing that we use so that you can be quiet or so that you can pay attention. And that's really important, or it's a really important benefit that often comes from sustained mindfulness practice. And it is certainly not the only way to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness can also be excited or loud or joyful, or mindfulness can be in conversation with one another. So I love classrooms that have a moment for gratitude or appreciation, or sending kindness and kind wishes to others in practicing heartfulness. Classes that have mindful movement. Again, there's certainly a regulating element, or can be, to that, but I think often for folks who come to teaching mindfulness and for whom mindfulness is new, it feels like it's got to look like that photo shoot where, you're calm and still and the child is floating on a cloud and the classroom is the quietest and stillest classroom that ever there was. And so I think it's really important to name that what does mindfulness look like in a classroom? It looks a lot of different ways, and it's not always still and it's not always quiet. And that's super important too.
Thanks, Alan. Judah or Corey, do you have anything you want to add to that? I have a kind of a follow-up question I was already thinking about.
Yeah, well, I wanted to just say that the feeling that I always get in thinking about mindfulness and what modeling does for the students, it lets them feel like the teacher or the leader at the moment is there for them as human beings. So that's the one thing that always stands out to me. Always is like what I try to embody is just being present for every human being that's in the space. And I really believe that mindfulness creates that opportunity. If it's in a moment, if it's in a minute, whatever time and space that it's utilized, it definitely does create that opportunity for everyone to feel like they're human beings in a space. So, that's just something that comes to my mind all the time.
Thanks for that, Judah. Yeah, I think the modeling, and each one of you have named that in different ways, that one of the most powerful ways that we can apply mindfulness to our context is really just to demonstrate what it looks like for us when we're triggered, or when we're feeling overwhelmed, or when we're feeling joyful, but just to take that moment of pause and naming that for our students, that this is what's coming up for us and how we're feeling, because it gives us permission to connect in with our feelings in that way, gives our students that permission. It also shows that reflective nature that, really mindfulness gives us that chance to be a little bit more aware. I'm wondering if each one of you wanted to talk a little bit about maybe some of the challenges. I think Alan alluded to this a little bit, but again, we get these ideas that it should look like every single child is sitting peacefully and no one's moving, and everybody comes out of that really blissed out and everything's perfect at the end of a mindfulness experience. But it'd be great to just, each one of you I know has either been applying mindfulness to your own context or supporting others. What's a common challenge that you've seen, and maybe just a little note of reassurance or support to folks around how to address that? Because I think that often are the questions that we see in our context. So maybe I'll start with Corey on that one, and then each one of you can weigh in on a challenge and an offering.
Megan, I just wanted to note, I don't think Judah's got a chance to go first yet. I just wanted to offer it to him if he wanted to jump in first.
Yeah, no, I definitely would. To that question, some of the difficulties, what I find is maybe miscommunication amongst adults. And one of the courses that actually helped me was mindful communication. So in taking that course, it helped me figure out how to best go about talking and having conversations with administration about, my offering and how that might look in their school, and just giving them the space to have their pushback and me not react, or, just being able to have that opportunity to just go through the dialogue in my mind first before actually starting the process with the stakeholders that are inside of the school. So that's sometimes where the difficulties lie, the communication amongst the adults, and the expectations. But what I can say is that course definitely gave me more insight into how to navigate as an outside provider. So, yeah.
Thank you, Judah. Okay, Corey.
So the challenges, there can be challenges with mindfulness practice. And I think first, I hear in that question 2 challenges. I think for me as an adult, the challenge of feeling like I wasn't doing it right, feeling like as I came to mindfulness practice that I wasn't good at it because I couldn't hold sustained attention on my breath for a really long time. And then feeling like if I couldn't hold sustained attention, even in that, like you can see my body, I notice my body goes like, oh, I can't hold it tight on my breath. And then feeling like if I can't do this perfectly or really, really great right at the beginning, how could I possibly teach this to young people? So that was a challenge for me as I came to mindfulness as an educator in the beginning, is feeling like if I'm not expert at this in the beginning, how can I start to teach this to young people? That was a challenge that came up for me. And so my note of encouragement there is that it's a practice, and you're not meant to be an expert of this practice. You're meant to be kind of a journeyer. You're meant to be a person on the path of it. And it's meant to be, I'm trying this out, and I want to invite you guys to try this out with me. And that trying it out, that kind of invitation is really what it's about. It's not about, I know how to do this perfectly and I'm going to teach you how. It's more, I'm trying it out and do you guys want to try it out with me? That framing has been really helpful to me as an educator. And then the second part of challenge is I noticed that for a lot of my students, coming into presence with their body is really uncomfortable. So for a lot of them, this is, you know, a mindfulness practice is the first time they're not distracted by something else. It's the first time they're paying attention to their body, they're paying attention to how they're feeling, and it can be uncomfortable because they've kind of ignored their body. They've ignored this kind of big stockpiling of feelings that they have. And it can be really overwhelming for them to come into contact with that. And in the beginning, it can feel like a big, uncomfortable feeling. And so my note of encouragement there is, I had a mindfulness teacher. I don't think this is particular to him. This use of the word is just titration, just little tastes of it. You don't have to do big 20-minute sits with young people, but just having them practice in small little doses, small little bites of mindfulness, just even a breath or two of practice, and just building that muscle, the small muscle of awareness or attention to themselves, so that they start to know that there is safety in themselves. There is safety in being able to be present and be present, to have presence and awareness with themselves. So you can do it. Thank you.
And Alan, challenges that you've seen and some offerings.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your naming, Corey, what's a really important trauma-informed practice of, you know, one of the phrases we use at Mindful Schools a lot is short moments of awareness repeated many times, that it doesn't have to be big, long sits, but really just in little moments, we're coming into contact with our own experience. And what we may find is really unpleasant, actually, because we're actually turning towards what is present now, whatever that might be. Maybe a different way of thinking or talking about kind of the same thing. We talk a lot in education about differentiated instruction to all of the different learners who are in the room. And with mindfulness, it's all of the different bodies that are in the room, and what is it that everyone's inhabiting kind of a different body. So many people ask about resistance. They're resisting mindfulness. And I don't think that's maybe the helpful term. It's that students in any moment are giving us information about what their current state of comfort or discomfort is, and how we work with that or allow that. Like I was just doing, I was asked to pop into a health and wellness class and do some mindful breathing. They had been talking about stress, and could I follow up with a little bit of mindful breathing with them. And, you know, for some people, you take a breath and it feels like shallow and uncomfortable. And for others, you take a breath and you feel really tired. And and this was like 9 a.m. for this group of 9th graders. And so everyone from like falling asleep to getting a little more anxious to, there's just this whole spectrum of how to hold it. And I think if the question is about the offering, my offering would be to hold all of that lightly, that it's not personal, and that we should actually expect that everyone in the room has a different experience. And the more we do this, the more we learn to both expect the different responses or the different ways it lands, and also to hold all of those and normalize all of those, which is actually the biggest gift that we can give to students. If we can normalize, yeah, in this moment, it's like this. And in this other moment, it's like this. And we could do the same thing, and it's going to have a different result on different days. We have different moods on different days. We have different levels of energy on different days. And actually our noticing that is also really important and empowering information.
Thanks for that, Alan, and everyone for your thoughts. One thing that I heard as a through line throughout what each one of you said is the idea of expectations, both expectations about what it's going to look like when we do it with others, as well as expectations for ourselves and how we will be or how our peers will be once we start to practice mindfulness. And I feel like it shows up a lot everywhere, right? But one of the things that happens when you start to practice mindfulness and integrate it into your life is you become more aware, and that's helpful. And you do start to gain some skills at making some choice points, but it's also a journey, and it's something that each one of us navigates every single day. So it's not a magic switch that once we start applying mindfulness to our classroom or to our own lives, that all of our problems or challenges are going to go away. We develop greater capacity to work with them and some ways to support ourselves and our students in that process, but it's not some kind of a magical cure for all things. And once we start practicing mindfulness, everything becomes more easeful. I have one last question, and which that's around advice. But before I get there, is there anything each one of you, either one of you, wants to kind of share around our discussion so far around applying mindfulness to the classroom, either a brief anecdote or again an offering before we transition to adults again?
I would say that mindfulness, what the student can take away from it, and what they can look at it as, they can look at mindfulness as an opportunity for them to remember that they are human beings. For everyone in the classroom to have that opportunity to remember that I'm a human being experiencing life, and I'm making myself aware of that. I can have the tools to do that moment by moment, or I can just over time just expand my awareness out into my experience of how my day went, or how I would like my day to go. So, I just want that to always be something that that I try to model. And the impression that I leave on students is that, yes, you are a human being having this experience, and just tune into it, get the most out of it. So.
Thanks for that, Cornell. Corey or Alan, you can just wave at me so I can see you. Okay, Corey.
Thanks, Megan. Two small things. One is that I think in education, we often are suffering with this kind of influx of initiatives and this feeling of initiative fatigue of like, what's the new thing and how do I possibly add this new thing in addition to all these other new things that I'm trying. And as a teacher, I definitely felt that. I felt this feeling of, I can't possibly add one more thing into the classroom. And so I just wanted to name the feeling that, for me, especially in the classroom, this feeling that mindfulness came in and really supported me and resourced me, and felt like it was a support for a lot of the other work that we were trying to do in our school. So for me, mindfulness felt like it was a connector or a resource for like our restorative practices, or some of the implicit bias work we were trying to do at my school, or some of the diversity and equity and inclusion work, and the SEL work. So for me, mindfulness came in and it didn't feel like an extra thing. Once I got my head around it, it felt like a support for some of these other initiatives. It felt like it held together some of the other work that we were trying to do. So it just felt important to me to say that I encourage folks to see it as kind of foundational and supportive rather than additional. That was one thing. And then also, I think it also can feel like this big thing I have to figure out how to do and become an expert of. And you can start really small. It's portable. You don't have to have like a lot of equipment. And you can start really small. You can start with just at the start of my class, we're going to take a couple of breaths together, and you can start as small as that. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Corey. So yeah, we're almost at the wrapping up stage here. And so Corey already just started us a little bit on that path, which is if educators want to get started, it'd be great to hear from each one of you advice. So it could be a course, but it also could be a strategy that you used, especially as you were learning to integrate this new practice into your life, maybe a way that you started to do that yourself. That, it could be a course, it could be, excuse me, could be a practice that you started to add in. But what are some ways that you started to bring mindfulness into your life is essentially the question. So if you're imagining a new educator starting out, what are some of those ways that they might do that? We haven't heard Alan's voice for a moment, so I want to bring him in first, and then I'll bring everybody else in.
Thank you. I'm torn because there are lots of different starting points, I feel like. And if someone was really, truly new to mindfulness practice, I would almost say start anywhere. And I don't have one specific place. And that where you're drawn or where it is that you feel the benefit of this practice for you, it will build and build on what feels accessible to you, what feels doable to you. rather than trying to, oh, I tried this program or this SID or this practice and I couldn't do something else, do something that you feel is manageable. But as far as classroom teaching, I would actually encourage people to spend one class period paying attention to their body while they teach. It is among the most revelatory things you might ever do as a teacher, or that I ever did as a teacher. We do this in the certification program, and listening to the reflections of teachers, like, wow, I've never spent that much time while teaching also noticing what happens in my body. It's crazy all the things that are going on in there. And really what that brings in terms of an awareness of how we're showing up, and then what that means in terms of what we can offer kids and how we resource ourselves differently.
Thanks, Alan. Judah, do you have any advice for educators starting off?
I originally got into, I searched for something, for tools to assist me. I was going to 4 or 5 different schools throughout the week, lesson plans, for each of those schools. And I needed to find something that would assist me, would allow me to just ground myself so that I can have enough space to compartmentalize all of what I was doing. When I got into mindfulness, it was definitely for myself. And, what it allowed me to do was just give space to my lessons, give space to the students that I would have to be in front of, and give space to the teachers also that I had to, co-teach with. So for yourself first is what I would say. If you're looking for something, if you can do an inventory on how your year went last year, or how if you're just new coming into teaching, how you can just notice your anxiety about how your year is going to go. If you have any of those kind of feelings, or concerns about, how you're going to show up in your classroom with your students, then, mindfulness is a tool that'll give you that opportunity to develop strategies, that only you'll know sometimes. And that's the powerful part about it, is it's you. It's like it's you with your toolkit, and how you're gonna show up in the world. And you could always work on it, So I would just say that for teachers coming in, wanting to learn about it, Mindful Schools has given me some valuable strategies and tools that that I've learned to embody and bring into the classroom and just bring into my life. So, yeah.
Thanks, Judah. Thanks for that. And Corey, any advice for someone starting out?
I would say that, the majority of teachers that I talk to here at Mindful Schools, they want to start with something for their students. And that's, again, I come back to the beginning and how it kind of opened at the beginning, is that's so natural and normal. We came into teaching to serve our students, to serve young people. And so I would say that while that's normal and natural, here at Mindful Schools, we're gonna say you are gonna start with you. And that's because we believe that you're worth it. And we believe that that's where it begins. It begins with you, and we're going to start with resourcing you, the teacher, and you're worth it. So we here at Mindful Schools will make it pretty easy for you. Our programming is online. So if you wanted to start, we would start with you and your personal practice. And our programming is online. So wherever you are in the country, you could take a course with us online. But I appreciate very much what Alan is saying, and what Judah is saying is that, start where you are, and thinking about how you could start to support yourself in a practice, and then to think about our first step is teacher first, personal practice, and then our second step would be how to start to share that with your students. And I would, let me stop there, Megan. Thanks.
Thanks, Corey. So thanks all three of you for joining us on our panel today. It was such a great discussion around mindfulness and importance of it for our educators. Corey alluded to this a little bit, and as did Judah and Alan, but Mindful Schools has quite a few courses and ways to provide support that I just want to remind everybody about as we wrap up here. So again, we really believe that the beginning and the most essential part of the work is for us to develop a personal practice. To support that, we've started having monthly live sits that are free. You can just sign up on our website, and it's different people from our community that lead a half-an-hour sit where we can be in community with one another and just have the practice be a great foundation for us. Mindful Schools actually is a community of more than 300,000 educators at this point, and it's a really vibrant community of people. So another place where you can get started is just to connect in with that community and learn more about the different people that have been doing mindfulness, like Judah and Alan and Corey, and hundreds of thousands of others who have been applying and practicing mindfulness. I think often when people start out, they feel like they're alone and that they're the only person in their school and or in their context that are doing mindfulness. So communities are really great support, especially if you are the first person in your area that's starting to do mindfulness, or you think that you are. To connect in with that community a little bit is helpful. We do have, we're opening right now and very soon the application for our year-long program. So if folks are interested in joining us for a year-long exploration into mindfulness, you can learn more about that. As Corey mentioned, we have online courses. We also have workshops every month on topics such as ADHD, teens, mindful games, things like that. So different ways to apply mindfulness to the context that we're seeing in our schools. And again, so as a first step, if you'd like, we'd invite you again to join us for our live sits, which is the first Wednesday of every month at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we just thank everybody for joining us today. I want to again thank you, Judah and Alan and Corey, for being with us on this call and for sharing your wisdom with others. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
So can we all take a mindful breath together?
Absolutely. Could you lead us, Judah?
All right. So everyone, we're going to settle into this moment, this opportunity for others to learn more about mindfulness, for others to experience mindfulness with us, and those that have taken in our sharing, and see where it may take them on their exploration. So we're going to take a deep breath in through our noses. We're going to exhale. And now we're just going to do this 2 more times. Inhale through our noses. Exhale. Inhale through our noses. Exhale. And we come back into the space, and hope that was a little example of modeling what that can look like for a person.
I can't imagine a more perfect way to end. So we'll end on that note. So thank you so much, Judah. Thank you again, Corey and Alan, and thank you for the Mindfulness and Education Summit for having us here. Thanks.
Thank you.